This video made possible by the Global Innovation Exchange. Visit gixnetwork.org to learn more.
I think what I'd like to do is have the panelists go ahead and introduce who they are, and then we can move to the discussion. So, Maria, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Maria Angeles Capellades Sola. I'm Director of Geospatial Engineering with the Climate Corporation. I'm based here in Seattle, and I'm in charge of all the back-end imagery services and pipeline processing systems that feed data into our agronomic models and also to our front-end applications.
Hi, I'm Ranveer Chandra from Microsoft. I'm in Microsoft Research. I'm a principal researcher there, and I've been leading the FarmBeats program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've been at Microsoft 13 and a half years, working on different things from networking. I lead battery research, and most recently, the farming agriculture project.
Hi, I am Sinduja. I'm from Washington State University. I work in the Department of Biological Systems Engineering, which is basically an agricultural engineering, and also affiliated with Center for Automated Agricultural Systems. We work on multiple things. One is precision agriculture, and the second aspect that has a lot of potential for IoT is phenomics, which probably we'll discuss during our discussions.
Well, thank you. My name is Zink. I grew up on a farm in North Dakota and moved to Seattle, worked at Microsoft for quite some time, went to John Deere, the large agricultural company, and now I'm at a startup called Growers. Maybe before we get started, if you could raise your hand if you know what precision agriculture actually is. Okay, well, there's a few of you. That's exciting. Maybe I'll just do a really brief introduction of that before we move to our panel. If you think about trying to be a modern farmer today, the GPS tractor actually was developed about 20 years ago. So you can self-drive your tractor down a field using GPS signals that have been differentially corrected through land-based units. And it's so robust that you can take a tractor with a 60-foot implement, have it drive itself down the field, turn around and be within an inch of where that implement left off. So this isn't your grandfather's tractor. This is modern agriculture at its finest. Once you know your location, it's a little bit like real estate, location, location, location. I have a lat-long picture of the land I'm trying to build or grow crops on. I can use that to do site-specific recommendations. Think about fertility, nitrogen application, seed selection. And so you take a large farm and you can divide it into things called management zones and treat each of those zones separately because of the soil characteristics of that zone. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. We'll talk a little bit about the IoT application of that today. And if you're interested, take a look at what's happening in agriculture, because I think you might find it is a little bit of a case study of where other industries are and might be going with this technology. So with that, I'll invite Ranveer first. Microsoft and agriculture. Maybe that's a little question mark. Why would you be interested in this? So you could tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So in the sense, if you think of it, the answer is quite simple. That is, Microsoft's mission is to empower every person and organization on this planet to achieve more. And a lot of the world's population are farmers. With FarmBeats, our goal is to empower every farmer to achieve more. That is, be more productive by adopting these precision agriculture techniques. Be more productive, save on costs, that's increase yields, as well as use sustainable agricultural practices. So if you think of it right now, the precision agriculture technique that Ron mentioned, existing solutions are still very expensive. Just to give you an idea, I was at an expo, and there were several companies that were presenting the latest and greatest precision ag equipment. And the cheapest sensor package that was available there were 5 sensors for $8,000 and a recurring cost. And if you think of it, that makes it, well, that puts it out of reach for most farmers. Even though precision agriculture as a technique was first proposed back in the 80s, it's been 30 years and the technology hasn't really taken off. So that is one of the main goals of the FarmBeats project. Our goal is to bring down the cost of these data-driven agriculture solutions by 2 orders of magnitude. And I'll talk later about some ways in which we can get there. But the key goal is, how do you bring down the cost of these solutions to make it affordable for all the farmers? Because in addition to just this aspect, there's also a human aspect to all of this. That is, the world's food production needs to increase by a significant amount that is by 70% compared to 2010 levels, to feed the growing population of the world. So I was at a similar panel with the Rockefeller Foundation as well. And they said, well, it's not only about feeding the world, what if you had to nourish the world, right? The problem is much more significant. So agricultural scientists like Sinduja here, they have proposed data-driven agriculture as one of the key approaches based on which we think we can achieve this food challenge. And because of this gap that, well, we need data-driven agriculture, but existing solutions are very expensive, they are unaffordable, we started the Farm Beats project as how do you make it affordable for all the farmers worldwide?
Great, thank you. If you follow agriculture a little bit, last year there's $2.4 billion that went into ag tech. A seismic event happened in 2013, exactly 5 years ago today, which was Monsanto bought the Climate Corporation for $930 million plus incentives for $1.2 billion. And Maria is from the Climate Corporation. We'd love to hear about what you're doing and your contribution to this endeavor.
Yeah, so at the Climate Corporation, as Ron said, in the last several years since the Monsanto acquisition, we have seen significant amount of growth year after year. So FieldView is the flagship product of climate, and it was launched in 2015 with 1.5 million acres covered. Then in 2016 went up to 5 million acres, in 2017 to 25 million acres, and today we have about 60 million paid acres. Just to give you an idea, that's about a third of all the corn, soybean, and cotton production or acreage in the United States. So what does that mean specifically? Well, an example for a farmer, say in the US, utilizing the nitrogen monitoring functionality of FieldView, in order to pinpoint what he or she wants is to pinpoint areas within the field, those management zones that Ron was mentioning about, pinpoint where there's a surplus and there's a deficit. But he or she doesn't need to go and pull and physically pull out samples from the soil, a very expensive operation that cannot be done when the crops are too high. But it can do that with the back-end functionality and the agronomic models that we have developed that take inputs from, for example, previous applications, crop and yield data from previous years, precipitation and weather data, field properties like topography and soil types across the field. There's a large degree of variability within a field, and other data. And based on that, the tool, which is basically data-driven, provides a figure of what the fertility status in the field is. Farmers today using this functionality are netting about $12 per acre, and this is combined between increased productivity and decreased costs, reduction in nitrogen inputs.
Great, thank you. And Sinduja, I know you're working a lot on sensor technology. I wonder if you might share a sensor or two that this audience would find interesting.
Yes, so we use sensors for multiple applications. One is to address the food security, because we know that we need to develop more food. So it takes around 12 to 20 years before a plant or crop variety is released. We are using sensing and IoT for that, as well as maintaining the production. And mostly we use multispectral imaging cameras as well as thermal camera. One of the products I'm excited about is Mikasen's new product called as Altum, which combines the multispectral and thermal. So instead of two cameras that we usually use to collect the data, that's a product that I'm excited about. But there are always something new in the market that you like to try out. So there's a lot of opportunities in the market, and agriculture is in the right place for its application.
And maybe if I may just ask you a follow-up to that, you hear a lot about satellite imagery, fixed wing, drones. What is your perspective on where that's all going?
There's a series of low-orbiting satellites that came in recent years. And we were doing, one of the limitations of satellite imaging has been its temporal resolution as well as spatial resolution. So the standard it depends on the satellite you're talking about, but you may get a 50-meter resolution depending on the satellite you're going to use. And now you can get in sub-meter resolution, spatial resolution, that you can really look at your crops that are even tiny. Legumes are pretty small in compared to some of the corn or even wheat. So we are able to see that. So I feel we are exploring in our research group use of low orbiting satellites as a replacement for drones as well, because you can do a temporal resolution, is how quick can you get the data. And nowadays the satellites can give you up to twice a week or more better temporal resolution. Drones are developing and there's a lot of investment, and my colleague Dr. Lavkot was in an Intel-sponsored AUVA, I don't remember, but it's a UAS conference, just happened last week. And they are investing on drone development as well as other companies that are available. So there are a lot of opportunities for drones. But I think it's not the technology, it's the application, and it's the data. I think that's why probably the climate COP was the right investment, because it's the data. How do you handle such a big data is a bigger question than how you can collect the data.
And maybe I'd ask either of you as well, is there a sensor that you think is either present or up and coming that's going to have a major impact on where this all goes?
I could take a shot. Well, I've been following the nitrate sensors for quite a while, and so these are, if a lot of you are doing IoT, and that's why you all are IoT experts and you are here. So one of the things you need to measure is what is the soil. Some of the standard ones, which people know what to do, is soil moisture, soil temperature, and things like that. But so with soil, you want to measure both all the physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil. The temperature and moisture is something people know how to measure. A lot of other things, for example, nitrate or micronutrients, these are things which don't exist, but there are some very cool innovations happening around in different universities, Iowa State, Cornell, WSU. Some of the new ones also around plant tattoos. That is, can a plant change color? That is, instead of a sensor, can a plant be a sensor? Right, that is, a plant could grow differently based on the different nutrient contents in soil. There's some really cool work happening in that space. Now, we could go into that. A lot of that is still in very early research, might be 5 years before they really take off. But yeah, so I'm really excited about what's happening in this space, and there's a lot of scope for innovation, a lot of these gaps to be addressed.
Yeah, and I don't think at Climate we are particularly looking at any one sensor to develop and be the silver bullet or the breakthrough. In general, we are more interested into how standards and interoperability develops, because the space of sensors, machinery, guidance systems, connecting devices is extremely large. It's very, very hard for any one individual to navigate that space in order to make a good selection for their farm or for their operation. So one of the main hurdles we need to overcome is really the interoperability problem, so that when you change sensors in whichever manner for whatever reason, you can easily connect to whatever platform you are using. So being able to serve all those sensors is really where we are putting our money. In addition to that, we are also focusing into not, if you picture, typically if you Google this space, you will find many images where you have many sensors on the field. That's not really how farm operations work. So typically what you want is sensors that can go on every pass. By pass we mean, I'm here talking about large crops, cereal crops, and large fields, not the more specific specialty crops or fruits and vegetables. But the pass is everything. So every time you pass over the field with your machinery, you want to be sensing something simultaneously. And that, I think, is where sensors are going.
So you've raised a challenge, I guess, to adoption. Perhaps Ranveer or Sinduja, would you have challenges you would bring up to where this is going?
Yeah, so So when we started FarmBeats, our goal was, well, we wanted to build maps of farms, heat maps of farms. For example, what is the soil moisture level 6 inches below the soil throughout the farm? If you're an IoT person, well, you'll say this is an IoT problem. I can put in lots and lots of sensors. All of them will send data to the cloud that can build that map, that the soil moisture 6 inches below the soil. Well, it doesn't really work that way in agriculture. Some of the key challenges are, one, connectivity. Most of these farms are in the middle of nowhere. How do you even get data from the middle of the farm? Not let alone sensors like cameras, drones. How do you get data from the middle of the farm? The second challenge is that of power. That is, there are no power outlets in the middle of the farm. One could think of using solar, but once you're in Seattle, you all know how difficult it can get in winter to power all these things in the farm. And the third challenge is, well, these sensors, as I mentioned earlier, are very expensive. So if you wanted to measure soil moisture and build an accurate soil moisture map, what is the soil moisture level 6 inches below the soil, you need a sensor, say, every 10 meters. But putting a sensor every 10 meters is expensive to deploy, to manage. It'll come in the way of the farmer as the farmer does the day-to-day job. So we are addressing all of these challenges in FarmBeats. I'll talk about one of them, which is around connectivity. So the problem here is, the farmer's house has some sort of connectivity to the cloud. They pay for broadband, but they get 1 to 3 megabits per second. But the actual farm could be a few miles away. Right? How do you get data from the middle of the farm? Sometimes, even though connectivity might exist, when you plant the seeds, by the time the crops grow, the connectivity is lost. So how do you provide connectivity? To solve this problem, we use this technology called the TV white spaces. This is a research that I've been doing since 2005. The key thing that it enables is, imagine if you have a Wi-Fi router and you could access it a few miles away. That would be cool, right? And the way we did that, the particular technology we had built was a way to take a Wi-Fi signal and put it in empty TV channels. This is over-the-air TV, the one you watch using rabbit ear antennas. When you browse through TV, when you see certain channels, you see some reception. On the other channels, all you see is white noise, nothing coming there. With this technology, you can take a Wi-Fi signal and put it in those empty TV channels in a way that doesn't interfere with your reception on an adjacent channel. That is, you could be watching channel 7 at home. On channel 8, we could be sending Wi-Fi signals. The key benefit is that compared to Wi-Fi, in UHF TV channels, your signals go 4 times farther. In VHF, they go 12 times farther. And this is in free space. Once you put in trees, crops, canopies, your signals just keep going through. In our latest experiments, we put them up to 1 meter under soil, and our signals keep going through that as well. The key thing in the context of agriculture is that in the farm, the TV towers are where people are. In Seattle, you'll have the TV towers. In the farm, which is away from the cities, most of the channels are just white noise. The more white noise channels there are, the more unused spectrum there is. We are talking of close to more than 100 megahertz of unused spectrum in the middle of a farm, more than half a gigabit per second of unused capacity in farms, at which point we are not only talking of sensors, you could connect drones, cameras, you could get a lot of data from the farm, which you couldn't get before. So I've been talking to a lot of agricultural scientists, and the number one problem they talk about is, how do I get data from the middle of the farm? With the work we are doing in the FarmBeats program, we are able to address that. In addition to connectivity, the other ones I talked about was power. We are doing some very good work with University of Washington for limited resources, the fact that you can't put lots and lots of sensors. The key technology we developed was to take the drones as the aerial imagery from drones and then use that to interpolate data from a few sensors to build really accurate maps for this farm. Like, what is the soil moisture map of a farm using very few sensors and combining that with aerial imagery from drones. Of course, the key challenge with all of this is you can't send all of this data to the cloud, which is where we rely on a lot of technology that has been built by Azure IoT, things like IoT Central, IoT Edge, which is everything is running on a computer sitting in the farmer's house, which is running IoT Edge, doing a lot of computer vision, machine learning, everything there. So you asked about the challenges. I talked about the challenges, but I think we have come up with some solutions. Of course, there are opportunities to improve them. But yeah, agriculture, even though it really challenges all the IoT experts, I think we are making significant progress in the right direction.
In regard to the transition of technology from research or science to application, I feel the technology is moving much faster than implementation in farms, is my opinion. Just last week, I heard a talk where they said the average age of a grower is probably 55, 60. It's around that. So their adaptation to new technology is much more slower. So they really have a certain way of doing things, which is hard to change. leave alone the growers, even sometimes scientists. So I work with a lot of biologists, crop scientists, who I still feel there are simple ways on doing things. Like still for seed size, they use sieve analysis, which is very traditional, standardized method. We can easily do it with image analysis. So I feel that the transition is as important as the technological development. And Washington State University offers an extension program where their focus is to convince a grower to use a technology in their operation. And you can talk to any extension specialist, they can say this can be very challenging. But there's a lot of potential. I think we have to start small. Maybe we can make things simple. Their simple operations can be replaced with technology and then go for a complex solution, is what it's my opinion.
I wanted to add something there just to Sinduja's point. That is, yeah, so one of the big challenges, as you mentioned, is the growing age of the farmers. And it's actually close, more than 50 now, late 50s. But one of the things is that technology can help some of these farmers get back, some of these people get back to farming. There is a farm in eastern Washington where we have a deployment, Nelson Wheat. It's an hour east of Spokane. The guy there, he used to be in Seattle, a technology guy, 5th generation farmer. The reason he went back was because he could use technology in the context of agriculture. And he's one of the farmers that we are piloting with. So one of the things, so we had Chairman Conway of the House Agricultural Committee visit that farm. And he made this point that, well, you know, technology can make agriculture cool again. We can get all these young guys to actually come back to agriculture. And that can probably address some of the challenges. But this, then again, this is a big gap, right? This is a few points of sample points that we have.
I like to add a different aspect in addition to what they said. Data becomes more valuable the longer you invest in it. So agriculture is not an operation that you expect to have results like immediately. You have to respect the physical laws of nature. And in that regard, as far as adoption rates go, the ability to prove that you can reliably produce outcomes that increase the productivity of the farm or increase the sustainability of the farm requires many, many years. So the challenge there for us, the providers, is to, again, the standards, interoperability, but also cross-calibration across sensors so that the data remains apples to apples 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because you do need, in order to have these agronomic or agrometeorological models produce more accurate outputs, you do need a lot of historical data that is clean, that it has been quality control, etc., from many, many different types of sensors, whether they are satellite-borne, space-borne, or airborne, or right on the ground, contact-based. So that's not an easy challenge to overcome. AgTech is still very new, and we live in the age of acceleration. There's an enormous amount of new technology and new offerings that are coming into the space. But in order for those technologies to be adopted by the ag industry, whether it's the small farmers or large-scale operations, you do need transparency. You need to prove that you can add value.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to have this conversation here in Seattle, Washington, with two major cloud providers in the world sitting here. But also, if you look at Washington State, the crops that we grow are really representative of the United States. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. If you go from vineyards to small crops to broadacre, where are the best opportunities for us here in Washington State?
So Washington State is I moved from Florida, and I was so excited because of just the diversity of the crops that are grown out here. If you don't know, there are more than 300 different types of crops that are grown in state. It includes both field crops as well as in controlled environment. And if you really go from east to west, there are areas that have this dry land where it's more wheat, legumes that are produced. And in heart of Washington, you have these tree fruits. And vineyard is a big growing industry. We are second to California. Of course, California produces 95% of the wine grapes. So still it's a big growing industry, and berries and other things. And if you really see, I think we are at least top 10 in the nation for at least 10 different commodities, including apples is one, sweet cherries, we are the top. Potatoes just behind Idaho. And I think in terms of quality, we have very good quality potato. We produce very high quality of, pardon?
Onions. Too.
Onions, yeah, and a lot more. There are so many crops that we can talk about. And that's exciting to work in the area of sensors, because some of these technologies are adaptable to different crops. It may not work the same way in every crop, but it can be transferred. The technology can be transferred from crop to crop. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And just following up on our previous panel, which they had an interesting conversation, in terms of labor, the labor shortage is the top priority for the tree fruit industry. Most of the crops, most of the tree fruits are harvested by hand, and they are not finding enough people to harvest, because the next generation kids are going to college, getting themselves educated. So that's automation. There is a big need for automation in terms of agricultural operations. So they are going to come back to technology, though they are not adapting or adopting at this point. They are looking forward to it, is what I can say.
Very good. If there's a question or a comment that anyone wants to entertain, be happy to do that. Please, yeah.
Question. Livestock falls under ag.
Yes.
So do you have any use cases or promising examples
Yes.
of IoT improving the humane treatment or the inhumane treatment of animals in ag?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been doing some research, and I was at a conference last week, Women in Agribusiness, where this business owner, a lady, AgriSense from Australia, presented their innovation in animal tracking. And IoT is so obviously a solution for animal management. They have these collars and a base station, 3G base that reaches far wide, and it's virtual fencing. It's very funny, but it produces a little sound when the cows go through a certain virtual invisible line. The line is really drawn by the farmer, by the rancher in this case, on an iPad, and it can be moved several times a day, and the cows within like 15 minutes, bam, get it. And they're very calm. There's no anxiety on the animals, so it's much better animal management. In the IoT case for animal or livestock management, the main thing there at the moment, the main challenge is really that you can only choose 2 things out of 3. You have distance, you have battery, and you have bandwidth. So you can choose 2 of those in your innovation, and that's the main limiting factor. But they have overcome that with battery, a lot of ingenuity in the battery life design that lasts 5 years with solar panels in that collar. The collar was like this big. And then, of course, making a lot of embedded software that runs really, really well, utilizing the GPS signal only when it's needed, because, as you know, if you GPS receiver is on all the time, you drain batteries. So very interesting applications in that area.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so in livestock, in addition to the one Maria mentioned, there's some company in Australia which is putting in some of these sensors inside the tummy of an animal. And they ran into communication issues, so the reason I got involved in that was, again, because of connectivity and using the IoT edge and so on. But that's one of the scenarios. The other scenario where which we are following as well, is around cameras in barns. So right now, people put tags on animals, and this is known to cause stress. Right? So one of the other non-intrusive way people are looking at is, can you put cameras in barns again, streaming data, for example, using the white spaces, the thing I talked about, to an edge, where then you could analyze, you can identify animals. So there's some new research that has come out which can uniquely identify an animal based on the machine learning techniques, based on deep learning techniques. Not just this is a cow, this is cow A versus cow B. And then if you can do that, you can then map the productivity of the animal based on what the animal is doing, whether the animal is resting, whether it's feeding well, how long it fed, things like that. So that's, again, another use case where cameras in barns with an IoT edge scenario where you're streaming data, running a lot of computer vision and machine learning on the edge. A third scenario which we did, this was in a farm in upstate New York, was this was when the cows were out in pasture. The farmer wanted to know how his cows are doing once they're out in pasture. What we did was we flew the drone. This was a 4-kilometer stretch. We flew the drone, transmitted the data, again, over the white spaces to the edge. This was a partnership with DJI where we are partnering with DJI drones. And at the edge, we are again running analysis to find out where the cows are, how the cows are pooping. This is deep learning on cow poop, by the way. So these kind of scenarios. So again, in the IoT for livestock is a huge, a few hundreds of billions-dollar industry, and there are lots of opportunities.
Yeah, so in WSU, we have research farms that have this ear tags that track the behavior of the cows and rumination, how long they have been active, how long they have been feeding, as well as the temperature, some of these things that are Internet of Things, because ultimately you can sit in your office and get all this data. One of the things is how do we make very low cost sensors that we can like quantity, right? You want a quantity with a low cost sensors, because if it is going from research to practical application, if you're going to have 10,000 cows in your farm, it needs to be affordable enough that you can track the entire thing. And that it's slowly going, the cost is coming down. Thermal cameras once upon a time was $30,000. Now you can get a decent camera with probably $300, but of course with a much lower resolution. And we are hoping that the cost of the sensors is going to go down and it become more affordable.
So one aspect we haven't touched upon, if you think about agriculture and then add that to the food chain, is around traceability of where your food comes from. And just last week, Walmart announced that by September 2019, if you want to sell lettuce through their channel, you need to have blockchain associated with that lettuce to see its pedigree. I'm just wondering if that's something that any of the panelists are working on and where they see blockchain plus agriculture going.
So we made an announcement last week, so at the keynote that Satya talked about a use case with Buehler, which is around traceability. This was about Buehler. They do food processing for, I think, a huge percentage of the grains, more than 50% of the grains worldwide. And then they had to identify these grains which shouldn't go out, right? So in real time, they were able to identify which grains were faulty and just throw it out. Again, a lot of it was leveraging blockchain, leveraging the IoT behind it. So this was one use case of traceability where you're making sure that the food grains that shouldn't be going out in the market don't go out. This is one use case. The other one is, of course, using IoT. This is something you're very familiar with, Ron, is around, well, you have these sensors in the farm. This is still an open problem where how was the lettuce grown? How much of, how was the lettuce grown? How much nutrients were put? Whether organic practices were used or not? Right now, there's a human that goes and looks at those. If you can somehow tie in the IoT sensors with the blockchain, maybe using something like Azure IoT Sphere, this is where we are creating these secure embedded devices, something like that, where you can then make sure that any data that is captured is not corrupted and goes as part of the blockchain, then you have the true farm-to-table scenario, right? The lettuce that you eat, you know how it is grown. So that's, again, another use case around blockchain. And similarly for livestock, there are use cases as well as like fruit orchards, not only broadacre or horticultural scenarios.
I think in terms of the blockchain, at Climate, we're not working on that, but in general, you need, for the advancement of AgTech, we need to have still the foundational layers implemented at a certain scale for other things to take off. Blockchain is one of those things that does actually need those foundational infrastructure layers in place. And in terms of what those foundational layers are, you can think of it in standards. interoperability, and most importantly, the digital platforms that integrate all those data streams. Blockchain will have applied as a tracking for digital transactions on digital assets, agricultural commodity assets. You will have several other hurdles to overcome, which is digital titles, for example, interoperability between different blockchains, and also just the agreement that transparency is something that the industry wants to commit to.
It is going to become very important, especially in terms of food safety. So everybody is thinking about it, and there's still, that is a good first step, right? Like, and it's going to become a mandatory thing somewhere down the line.
So we have just a few minutes left. Maybe if I could ask each of you, we're kind of in the present now, but we're thinking towards the future, of course. If you're looking out 5 or so years, is there something big you see that is going to really manage to accelerate the work we're talking about?
I don't particularly think there will be the one thing. I think change is the future is gonna come upon us and we won't notice it because it's gonna be really incremental. Incremental adoption of technology, always, and this I think is important for anybody entering the agtech field, is to enter it with deep humility. It's very complex, and oftentimes I think agtech innovators make the mistake of assuming that just because the technology is available, it will be adopted. And the rate at which technology changes, I mean, we do live in the age of acceleration, is much faster than the rate at which management practices and decision-making practices change at the farm level. So we need to respect that for the big boom to happen. But I don't think we will see it as a, oh my God, look at this disruptor. I think it's just gonna sneak up on us slowly. And most importantly, the space is super huge, especially for IoT. We've been focusing here a lot on row crops, but think about it, there's a lot of vertical farming indoors, glass houses, intensive horticulture, specialty vegetables, small business owners versus large-scale operations, organic farming versus conventional farming, and an area which I think has the most potential for innovation, which is waste. We really are producing, there's a lot of food that will be needed in the future to feed the growing population, but at the moment we are overproducing food and we're wasting a significant amount in the process of transportation, storage, etc., if you think about it globally. So there's a lot that we can do just to reduce waste.
Yeah, in my case, the path forward, I'm very bullish on data-driven farming. That is, there'll be more data. With FarmBeats, we're just scratching the surface. There's so many open problems to be solved. I think the developed world is still adopting things really fast. The biggest challenges will come in the developing regions where more than 2/3 of the world's population in these poor economies are farmers. These are farmers like places in India, in Africa. How do you get them to use any of the benefits of agriculture, of the data-driven agriculture techniques that we are developing? I think that's an open challenge, but we are working on that. We need the entire community to think about new ways, about technologies that can take it there. But yeah, that's one thing which is at the top of my mind. And the things that Maria mentioned as well, that is this entire scope of agriculture is very big, and there are things like vertical farming and things like that, and new agricultural verticals, livestock, orchards, aqua, the fish farming. All of them have a lot of unique challenges. But yeah, I'm super bullish on data-driven farming. The white space is one enabler, the drones is another. The drones the drone regulations will ease out, hopefully, in the next 5-year horizon you mentioned. So that will enable a lot of new scenarios, especially non-line of sight drone usage, where you can then use drones not only for scouting, but for automation as well. They can go and spray the field. They can go and chase the cow, get the cow back to the barn. There are many scenarios that we haven't even thought about, which I think will happen.
So the future is in digital agriculture. It is the data, is what I feel. And I'm excited about the low orbiting satellite images that can provide high resolution, that can really enhance the scalability of sensing in terms of probably a much deeper application than we see it currently.
Well, very good. I want to thank the panelists for this great discussion, and all of you for your engagement. If you go home today and you're wondering, how to explain to your spouse or significant other the intersection of agriculture and technology, I think you can talk about, cows that are being herded through iPads. That might be one that I came away with, or plants that you put in the ground and change color and tattoos based on the nutrient content of the soil. That sounds pretty high-tech and innovative. So thank you. If you're interested in agriculture, join us. There's a big, broad world out there. We'd be happy to have you a part of what we're all doing. Thanks.
Thank you.